call to order this hearing of the Legislative Audit Commission. Our task is to receive the presentation of the evaluation on the Department of Employment and Economic Development Grants Management. Would like to welcome the Deputy Legislative Auditor of the Program Evaluation Division, Ms. Jody Munson Rodriguez, and Mary Ann Nada, the Evaluation Manager. And we will note that we do have a quorum. Who is participating online? Anyone?
Representative Jacob and Senator Drazkowski.
Representative Jacob and Senator Drazkowski are participating online. We don't anticipate having any action, so there will be no roll calls or votes taken. So welcome to the commission, and you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Jody Munson Rodriguez, and I'm the Deputy Legislative Auditor for OLA's Program Evaluation Division. I'm excited to be here today to share with you the results of our evaluation of DEED's grants management. When OLA comes to you, we often talk about compliance, whether agencies are ensuring that tax money is going to its intended beneficiaries. But equally important is program performance, whether money is being spent in a way that achieves its policy goals. And in this report, we looked at both compliance and performance. Because DEED manages numerous types of grants, we had to focus our efforts. At the direction of the LAC, we focused on grants within the Office of Broadband Development. We also looked at certain workforce grants. Evaluating the performance of the broadband grants in our review was more or less straightforward, as the legislature has established certain goals for broadband in statute. For workforce grants, however, it was less straightforward. Neither the legislature nor DEED have established clear goals for the programs, so it was difficult to measure what success would look like in those programs. We also saw a few opportunities for DEED to more actively manage some of those grants to help ensure their success. To talk more about these issues, I'll hand it over to the Program Evaluation Manager, Mariam Nada.
Welcome, and we invite you to make your presentation.
Thank you, Chair and members. For the record, my name is Mariam Nada. I'm with the Office of the Legislative Auditor, and I'm the manager for this evaluation. Before we begin, I'd like to thank my colleagues on this project, Gretchen Becker, Eleanor Berry, and Hannah Garasu, who are also here with us today. I'd also like to thank the staff of Department of Employment and Economic Development for their assistance throughout our evaluation. I'll get started by sharing the screen. I want to briefly provide some context for our report. As we explain in more detail, in our report, DEED manages a number of state-funded grant programs. For the purposes of our evaluation, we focused on two main grant programs managed by DEED. The workforce grants we reviewed include select, competitive, and legislatively named grants aimed at providing employment and training services for Minnesota adults. The broadband grants we reviewed are aimed at supporting the expansion of broadband service in certain parts of the state where broadband service is not available or does not meet certain speed thresholds. For these programs, we looked at program performance and compliance with state grants management requirements. I'll start off by highlighting some of our key findings before providing more detailed information. First, statutes require the Department of Employment and Economic Development, or DEED, to report on certain performance metrics for its workforce grants, including some workforce grants we reviewed. However, as I will explain in more details, we found that without performance goals, the metrics that state law requires DEED to report are not useful for measuring program success. Second, broadband grants we reviewed largely met the goals specified in contracts. In addition, we found that DEED did not comply with some state grant oversight and reporting requirements. I'm going to take a step back now to provide some context for our findings and additional details about them, as well as our recommendations to DEED and the legislature. Before I jump into our findings, I want to provide a quick overview of grants management at DEED. DEED manages a number of state-funded grant programs with the goal of improving employment and economic development. In fiscal year 2024, DEED spent about $354 million on state-funded grants. DEED's grantees include local units of governments and nonprofit organizations, as well as private businesses. In its management of grants, DEED is subject to applicable requirements in law and the Department of Administration's Office of Grant Management Policies. For the workforce grants we reviewed, we focused on competitively awarded Pathways to Prosperity grant program and certain legislatively named grant programs. In general, the workforce grants we reviewed are aimed at providing employment and training services for Minnesota adults, though the specific trainings and services varied between grantees. As we describe in more detail in our report, the Pathways to Prosperity program awards competitive grants to nonprofit organizations, local units of government, and other entities. The Pathways to Prosperity program is aimed at supporting Minnesotans who may face barriers to employment. We describe activities funded through Pathways to Prosperity on page 12 of our report. In addition, in recent years, legislature has assigned DEED responsibility to manage a number of workforce grants that the legislature has directed funding to in law. The legislatively named grants we reviewed fund a wide range of services. We provide some examples of grant-funded activities on page 16 of our report. The Legislative Audit Commission directed OLA to review the extent to which select DEED grants are meeting its stated goals. Minnesota statutes require DEED to collect certain performance metrics for some of the workforce grants we reviewed. These metrics are generally numbers, such as the number of participants who enrolled in programs or number of participants who attained a credential. However, the legislature has not directed DEED to establish measurable performance goals for these programs, and DEED has not done so. As such, we found that the performance metrics that state law requires DEED to report are not useful for measuring program success. As we explain in more detail in our report, these numbers are generally ineffective at measuring program success. For example, it is difficult to determine whether 20 participants completing a training is a success. Additional context would help, such as learning that 60% of participants completed a training. However, many factors contribute to the ability of an individual to complete a program. As such, without measurable goals to compare performance metrics, it's difficult to determine whether a grant program was successful. Even though these programs lack goals, we thought it would be informative to analyze data on program participants that DEED collects for the workforce programs we reviewed. For our analysis, we focused on participants' experiences at the time they left their respective programs, which we describe in more detail on page 20 of our report. We also gathered feedback from recent program participants about their experiences with the program, which we discuss on pages 22 to 23 of our report. First, we analyzed outcomes for about 2,600 participants who enrolled in Pathways to Prosperity grant programs in the fiscal year 2022 to 2023 grant period. Overall, we found that about 63% of participants who enrolled in the grant period had successful outcomes. More specifically, at the time their enrollment ended, about 29% of participants completed the training and earned a certificate or otherwise completed training objective, and another 27% had new or better employment as a result of the training program. We also analyzed outcomes for over 3,000 adults who enrolled in training programs provided through a legislatively named workforce grant in the same period. Based on our analysis, we found that about 42% of these participants had successful outcomes. More specifically, 21% of participants completed the training and earned a certificate or otherwise completed training objective, and 23% of participants had new or better employment outcomes at the time their enrollment ended. For example, we heard from a participant that the training helped them obtain a certificate to pursue a nursing degree and change career paths. While we reviewed program participant data to assess participant outcomes, in the absence of goals, we are not really able to say whether these outcomes mean the program was successful. And we can't say if the legislature would determine that the outcomes we identified are successful either. As such, we think there are benefits to building on the performance metrics and establishing meaningful and measurable performance goals for these workforce programs. For example, establishing goals could help the legislature and DEED determine the extent to which these programs as a whole are meeting their stated purpose. As such, we offer recommendations to the legislature and DEED. We recommend that the legislature direct DEED to establish measurable performance goals for the workforce grant programs we reviewed. We also recommend that DEED use program data to establish performance goals for these programs. DEED requires grantees to report certain data in relation to the performance metrics we discussed. DEED could use the data reported by grantees to identify measurable goals that considers the community served, economic environment, and other factors. The legislature also requires DEED to publish a net impact analysis of certain workforce programs. The net impact analysis is intended to provide information that is different from the performance metrics we discussed. A net impact analysis compares participants to non-participants to determine whether the program was the cause of certain outcomes or whether these outcomes may have occurred in the absence of the program. For example, while we heard from the participants about positive outcomes for them as a result of participating in certain programs, there are many factors that could contribute to these outcomes, such as economic conditions at the time. A net impact analysis, on the other hand, could estimate the effect of the program on participants independent of economic conditions. We found that DEED has not complied with the statutory requirement to analyze the impact of its workforce programs. More specifically, DEED did not complete the most recent mandatory net impact analysis within the required timeframe. DEED last published the report in 2017 as required. The next report was due in 2021. Because an impact analysis can provide more intentional information about the effects of these programs, we recommend that DEED complete the workforce program net impact analysis as required. In addition to the workforce grants we reviewed, the Legislative Audit Commission also directed OLA to review broadband grants managed by DEED. Statutes direct DEED to manage a number of grants to support the expansion of broadband service in areas where broadband service is not available or does not meet certain speed thresholds. We focused our evaluation on the border-to-border broadband development grant program. DEED makes determinations about whether grant applicants can meet geographic goals during the application stage. As such, we did not review whether grantees met those goals. Instead, we reviewed the extent to which grantees met some of the goals outlined in grant contracts, namely locations and state speed goals specified in contracts. We found that all broadband grantees built broadband infrastructure that met goals specified in grant contracts. As we describe in our report, DEED contracts with a third-party vendor to validate the infrastructure built by grantees meet the goals established in DEED's grant contracts. Based on our review, in general, DEED's third-party vendor validated that the grantees in our review built broadband infrastructure to serve locations and state speed goals specified in contracts. Now I will shift gears to discuss our findings related to DEED's oversight of its grant programs. For the purposes of our evaluation, we focused on DEED's oversight responsibilities after it awarded a grant, the active or closeout stage shown on this diagram. As we describe in more detail in our report, after awarding a grant, Office of Grants Management, or OGM, policies require state agencies to monitor grant progress and ensure grantees are using funds appropriately. In addition, when the grant is completed, OGM requires state agencies to evaluate grantee performance. In its oversight role, DEED's program division staff also provide a number of support to DEED's grantees to help them comply with the requirements specified in their grant contracts. To answer our research questions, we conducted a survey of DEED grantees who received a recent workforce or broadband grant. In addition, we reviewed a sample of grant files to assess DEED's compliance with certain OGM requirements. Grantees who responded to our survey generally had favorable opinions about DEED's support to them. For example, most survey respondents had favorable opinions about the timeliness, helpfulness, and clarity of DEED's communication. At the same time, based on our review of 43 grants, we found that DEED did not comply with some OGM oversight policies, First, OGM policy requires DEED grantees to submit progress reports according to the schedule specified in contracts. DEED collected only about 1/2 of the required progress reports. In addition, DEED did not collect any progress reports for 4 grants in our review. Second, OGM policy prohibits state agencies from making payments to grantees when they have past due progress reports, and DEED paid at least $5 million to grantees in violation of this policy. Third, OGM policy requires state agencies to conduct annual monitoring visits for grants of over $250,000. DEED did not monitor any of its 11 broadband grants of over $250,000 within the first year of the grant, in violation of OGM policy. And finally, DEED did not complete grant closeout evaluations for many of the grants in our review, and those that did complete lacked required information. For example, the standard template that DEED staff used did not contain a section to record status of any financial or audit concerns. We think that DEED's noncompliance with OGM policies jeopardizes DEED's ability to effectively manage grantee performance. For example, collecting progress reports can help DEED staff promptly detect any issues that grantees may have with meeting grant objectives. As such, we recommend that DEED ensure its program staff comply with all OGM requirements. That concludes my prepared remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much for the report. We'll hear from the respondents and then maybe ask you to come back up if there's further information. Thank you. Further information that we need. And I note that Senator Pratt is in the room. If he would like to join us, that would be fine. Or you can stay in the audience at your pleasure. So now we will ask the commissioner and the deputy commissioner and the Bree Mackey, who is the Broadband Development Division Director, to join us. Thank you very much. Welcome to this hearing, and we're pleased to have your response.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. For the record, my name is Matt Verlick, and I serve as Commissioner of the Department of Employment and Economic Development.
Thank
I
you.
am accompanied by colleagues, as you referenced, Madam Chair, 2 of our deputy commissioners, each of whom have responsibility for the 2 areas of grants that were reviewed in this instance, and then also some of our staff who lead other work, and we can engage them as appropriate. But if it works for you, I would share some initial thoughts that are basically an abridged version of the response letter that we provided to the legislative auditor. And so as I addressed in the letter to Auditor Randall, and I would add as well to the deputy auditor and the whole team, we thank you for the opportunity to review and respond to the recommendations in your evaluation of grant management policies and procedures of the 2 programs just mentioned at DEED. I appreciate the close review of grants administered by DEED's Office of Adult Career Pathways and Office of Broadband Development, ranging from the fiscal years 2021 to 2023. The external review of this important work provides DEED the opportunity to improve our efforts of how we serve Minnesotans. And I'll just add that we also appreciate the collaborative spirit between the team at the Legislative Auditor's Office and our team at DEED. In everything we do, our mission at DEED is central to the work, and that is to empower the growth of the Minnesota economy for everyone. We do manage a number of grant programs focused on workforce and community development, and it's our responsibility to do so with transparency, accountability, and efficiency. We do this to carry out the intent of the legislature and support our grantees in providing important services to their communities. And I'll add that we are proud of the track record we have of delivering these programs in an effective way and with high integrity. We also appreciate the opportunity to make improvements. So I would then share responses to individual recommendations from Legislative Auditor in their report. First, with respect to the first item about goals, I would note that DEED currently complies with the requirements set forth under 2024 Minnesota Statute Section 116L.98, which requires DEED to implement a legislatively required uniform report card and provide outcome measurement and reporting for adult workforce-related programs funded in whole or in part by state funds. The uniform report card is available on our website and available to the public there. We appreciate the recommendations that the legislature might include more specific and measurable performance goals for workforce grants in addition to the metrics as noted. And we are committed to collaborating on statutory changes and implementing any additional requirements that would be adopted by the legislature. Moving on then to the second recommendation regarding the net impact analysis report. Here, I can just say straightforwardly, we acknowledge we have not completed that workforce development report net impact analysis and agree with the recommendation that we do so as required. And we are in the process of taking necessary steps to complete this report. And I'll just add, I think it will be a valuable resource in the sense of providing comparisons to those that were in our programs and those who weren't. Next, regarding recommendation 3 on grant oversight, a little longer reply here. DEED agrees with the OLA's findings related to grant oversight and its recommendations. As is the case with many state programs implemented during the COVID-19 pandemic, we were confronted with unprecedented challenges in administering grant programs. Similar to other public entities, as well as business, nonprofit, and community partners, the context in which the agency worked during the pandemic is important when reviewing administration of the grants. DEED was required to routinely and quickly pivot to deliver services to our customers, all while the state enterprise was adapting to staff shortages, COVID safety measures related to public health, remote work, and ongoing uncertainty. Staff managed significant increases in work volume while adapting to changing work environments and business processes. During the pandemic, DEED workforce development staff primarily conducted desk audits to protect the health and safety of staff and grantees. DEED also experienced some staff turnover, which created challenges in completing monitoring of some of the grants during this timeframe. However, DEED continued with reimbursement contracts and, importantly, staff scrutinized invoices to ensure that all financial requests accurately reflected reasonable work performed by grantees. While DEED agrees that on-site monitoring did not occur for the broadband grants over $250,000 within the first year, our Office of Broadband Development staff actively monitored broadband grantees and projects per the intent of grant management guidelines. This was done during the unprecedented context of the pandemic, often replacing physical site visits. Monitoring throughout this time included the review of progress reports and requests for reimbursement, answering grantee questions, and providing ongoing guidance. Of note, often the projects themselves were frequently impacted or delayed due to safety restrictions, supply chain issues, permitting delays, thereby reducing activity of the grantees in the first year. In the case of many projects within the first year, site visits would have discovered no physical infrastructure work had been done, context that DEED staff was already aware of. However, regular and required monitoring did occur for all grants, both virtually and in person, by the end of the grant period, leading to successful completion of all contract project goals. Office of Broadband Development has also implemented changes over the last 2 years and continues to focus on improving documentation, updating forms, and the use of available tools as approved by Office of Grants Management. Briefly, I'll say regarding corrective action on this, since the timeframe of the audit report, DEED has aligned its forms with OGM. DEED has implemented a revamped workforce grants monitoring process and increased the number of staff performing monitoring duties and functions. In the past 2 years, we've implemented a new reimbursement payment request template, which requires the agency to proactively confirm and document the status of quarterly progress reports and ensure accurate closeout. Further, we have implemented a process for discontinuing payments if quarterly reports are not received in a timely manner in compliance with OGM policy. And we're currently in the process of reviewing and updating all grant policies to ensure compliance with legal requirements and OGM's policies and ensuring that best practices are met. So in conclusion, addressing state oversight and reporting requirements is critical to helping DEED achieve its mission, and we appreciate the recommendations included in the report. It really was a thorough report with surveys of, I think, 3,000 grantees, or rather individual participants in the case of workforce development, in-person ride-alongs with our contractor who evaluates out in the field the broadband grant implementation. And so really, this is just a thorough outside look at the work we're very much in the middle of, and we appreciate what it provides us in terms of actionable changes. And again, I would add that since the timeframe of the grants reviewed in this report, we have made further implementation of the changes in policy for Office of Grants Management and engaged in continuous improvement, and we look forward to continuing that with these recommendations in hand.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there comments or questions from the members? Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it's disappointing that COVID was only part of the time period, and it's used as an excuse. You stated that annual monitoring did occur, but it's noted that on slide 17, did not monitor broadband grants over $250,000 annually. So there's discrepancy from your statements and what's given in the report. But it's really bothersome that the statutory requirement to analyze the impact of workforce programs, there hasn't been one since 2017?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative, the report, I believe, is due every 4 years. And so the 2021 one was not completed, and we are overdue on the 2025.
Representative.
Thank you. So, Madam Chair, I believe what I heard is, no, there hasn't been one that's been done since 2017. Going back to slides 7 and 8 with the what has been learned from the large percentages of unsuccessful outcomes to differentiate between grants that work and grants that don't?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative, I don't have the slides in front of me, but in terms of the success rate of the program interventions, we're quite pleased with the rate of those that did benefit. And for those that didn't, oftentimes they would exit the program due to changes in life circumstances and some things that we can't control. I think if we aimed for a 100% success rate, there would be a risk of only bringing into the program those who were sort of best equipped to engage successfully. But really, we are here to serve all Minnesotans, including those that might really have a harder time. And so we, of course, want to try to get that success rate as high as can be, but we also can't control certain life circumstances. And ultimately, these are all investments in human capital and giving people opportunities to earn a better living and contribute to our overall state prosperity. And again, I appreciated some of the quotes from surveyed participants indicating that the program did that.
President Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the workforce, it was less than a quarter were successful. There may be parameters or activities, feedback, something to improve it beyond the small portion. I'm sorry, I thought you were paying attention when they presented this, plus you responded to the report, and the information's in the report. So I just assumed that you paid attention to the results of the audit. But so if less than a quarter on the workforce grants are successful, there might be peripheral things involved in the granting, communication, et cetera, that could be done. Frankly, we try things in legislature and we try to learn from the outcomes to improve it. And, my question was, how are you improving it? And I didn't hear an answer. So are you not looking at ways to improve this? So that's why you don't have a response of your analysis has presented X things that you're looking at to improving?
Commissioner?
Representative, Madam Chair,
Sure.
thank you for the question, and thanks Auditor Randall for providing the slides. I have a copy of the 58-page report here, but finding the right chart didn't come to me right away. The one that I'm looking at for Pathways to Prosperity shows 29% completed training objectives, 27% had a new or better employment outcome, and 6% had an other successful outcome. So that differs a little from, I think, the figure that you were talking about. And my comment before was that achieving 100% might be a goal, but that if we did that and potentially limited who enters the program so that we could achieve 100%, we might not be helping those that are somewhat harder and face more difficult circumstances. So we certainly always want to be learning from the outcomes of our grantees. And of course, this analysis only looked at two phases of the grant making process, namely implementation, oversight, monitoring, and then sort of closeout, but not the selection process. Well, I would say the selection process where we decide which grantees will be receiving the funds is an important place where we look at performance. And if we know from our monitoring of a previous grant that a particular nonprofit, for example, might not have had good luck with achieving the outcomes we're looking for, we certainly would take that into account there because we want to make maximum impact with the dollars allocated to us.
Representative Quam.
Thank you. The major discussion was over the workforce of where less than 25% showed better employment outcome or other successful outcome. And when you were going through on the first one, the pathways, I'm looking at that other successful outcome plus new or better employment outcome, that is a third. Going through the program, if it's not successful, isn't the objective we're going to have people go through this. Our objective should be making sure that the programs improve, that if we see that these things are more successful, we feed that back to the entities that are involved, and not be accepting of these lower outcomes. But what I anticipate when someone responds to an audit and comes to the hearing is that you're familiar with, because you've already written a response, and we include it in the report, but also you're thinking about how can we do things better? And that's what I'm missing. Maybe offline and later you can give us a good list of these are the things we've learned and this is the priority of what we're trying to improve and make things better, because I guess it's not unusual that we're disappointed by some of the things in the results. It is somewhat unusual that there isn't a response that says, this is our plan to, fix it. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
Madam Chair? Oh.
I find what I had to rethink the definition of what's an unsuccessful outcome. And it's like it's not the same thing as getting involved in a program and then getting an F. You failed. That's not what an unsuccessful outcome means. And I'm trying to get that through my, my head. And it will mean, and maybe more detailed response to explain, an unsuccessful outcome might be, someone got sick and they weren't able to complete the program, or they thought they were going to like it, and instead of that, it was absolutely not for them. Well, that's an unsuccessful outcome, but it's not necessarily that the program wasn't achieving its goals. And I, would appreciate more kinds of information about that through this, but no fault of the evaluators. I mean, if something was successful, there are measures of success, but it's not only that they got in the program, it was the right fit, they stayed healthy, they had no family concerns, there were no, nobody got COVID, and they completed the training and got, I'm just looking at one of them, Pathways to Prosperity, and they got, and there was, a successful outcome. But it's a little bit different, it seems to me, to say that unsuccessful outcomes are absolutely correlated with failure of the program. Would we want everyone who wants to get in one of these programs to are clear-eyed, have great personal goals, are financially making it at least to some extent, and yeah, I don't like to see orange unsuccessful outcomes, but I do think that that's a really broad category, and the deputy auditor and the evaluator certainly there's a broad brush there, which we need to know, but it's a little bit different than that should be the guide for changes in the program. And so I share kind of the frustration about knowing more, and that would be very helpful. But we also have a definition issue here, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate Representative Quam calling that to our attention.
And Madam Chair?
Sir,
If
yes,
I
sir.
may, thank you for those comments, and Representative as well. And I did find in the report, the page, I don't quite have the pages maybe that you do, because I'm looking at a red line version. But unsuccessful outcome is defined there, and it does track with what you said and what I was attempting
Okay.
to sort of paraphrase earlier. And that is that the participant left the program before gaining better employment or completing the program goals. Participants may leave a program before completing it for many reasons, including moving from the area, experiencing a personal or medical problem, or because they were no longer interested in the program. In addition, a grantee may end a participant's program enrollment if the participant has not responded to the grantee's attempts to contact them. So that speaks to what you were saying. And I would also like to maybe just adjust one thing I said earlier about the notion that we take performance into account when it comes to those grants that are awarded through a competitive process. Representative, I think you were asking about the legislatively determined grantees, and in that case, you're right. We don't apply a sort of performance evaluation there on the selection process, because we're simply doing what the legislature told us to in terms of who to give the grants to. We still do the monitoring, but we don't have as much latitude about who gets the money.
Commissioner, some of us only get, we get a briefing ahead of our meeting, but we don't always have a chance to read the report thoroughly before it's presented.
Well, Madam Chair, if you have any spare time tonight, I highly
Yeah,
recommend.
right. Going to be watching basketball, I think. Right, Senator Pratt?
Absolutely. That's right.
Senator Pratt, did you have any comments or observations you'd like to make?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and a number of the issues that were raised in the report have been under discussion. In fact, we have Senate File 2465 is going to be in front of the Jobs Committee on Wednesday, which talks specifically about enhanced reporting requirements. I think this report
It's going to be helpful.
will help me in maybe crafting a couple of amendments for that. I have not heard from the department on their thoughts on 2465, and I'm hoping this will spur some of that conversation. I found it interesting on the discussion around unsuccessful outcomes. And I was trying to just look it up. I thought I saw somewhere in here, we've got a problem with DEED as we've had with MDE and DHS about lack of site visits and follow-up with some of the participants. It's been a frustration of mine going back for a while on the fact that sometimes we just don't get reports from the grantees. And I think we need to be stronger in that.
Bit more aggressive,
A lot more.
or a
aggressive.
lot more aggressive, yeah.
And in some cases, we need that information from DEED. I think DEED needs to be more proactive in providing that information as well. But my fear is that when we talk about unsuccessful outcomes, and one of the categories is, well, the participant didn't get back to us. We don't know the effort that the grantee put into contacting that participant. And, could it be one of these cases like we see Jay Coles do, to go knock on a door and say, well, it's an unsuccessful participant, but maybe we sent one email, maybe we didn't do anything, but we called it that. We don't know. There's just so many questions, and I would really like to see, and I don't know if this is the OLA's data or the department's data. I would like to see that broken down by grantee. Every one of these categories broken down by grantee. I want to know if we've got a grantee who has an exceptionally high rate of unsuccessful outcomes, regardless of medical condition or whatever. But my guess is when we find those high ones, we'll find lack of prudent effort.
I did note that you do have, I think I was reading that correctly. If you thought that kind of like nothing was happening, that you were able to discontinue payments to that particular grantee. So you'd had that kind of oversight that in the past we've seen those who were in charge were not allowed to do that. So I think that's another part of the oversight that DEED has that we should be grateful for. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And part of my background has been involved in private sector activities to help portions of the community. And there was one that was a partnership between higher ed and a corporation that looked at people that were from communities that had higher dropout rates in college. And so it was aimed at, and it was very extremely successful at helping them with the peripheral assistance and learning and skill gaining to where they were successful. And so when I look at programs, I think about what is the rest of the story because you've got different entities, and some entities learn from each interaction and come up with better background materials, assistance, or way of interacting and conversing with the person that's being helped that increases the rate of success. And that's what I'm looking for and I'm used to, because we all want to, do a program and actually help the people. And just going through the motions, I think is not the way we should approach that. So I look forward to future conversations of how we've, through feedback and interaction, we are growing the rate of success. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Quam. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, the Deputy Auditor and the Program Evaluation. We really appreciate all your work, and we're probably going to be looking at closing the loop on some of these things and getting away from the challenges that everyone in government faced during in the aftermath of the pandemic. So we thank you for your service. Thank the Auditor Randall and Ms. Munson Rodriguez and Ms. Notter. And I don't believe we have any further business, so this hearing is adjourned.